Welcome to the Spirit of Business, episode number 48. What is your real motivation? With Matt Murphy and Sarah McCrum.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Matt.
I was talking to one of my clients the other day, just in relation to motivation. And we're having a conversation because obviously we can go through periods of time where we feel motivated and then the times where we don't feel motivated. And I think that my experience with talking to people, especially in business, is that when they lose motivation, lots of things go wrong in the business. And when they've got great motivation, a lot of things are going to go right in the business. And sometimes we don't know what the things that we are that do motivate us. And so I was talking to this particular person and they said, do you know what my motivations are? Asking me to reflect to them, because sometimes it's hard to see your own. I said, yeah, I see your motivation or what you love to do. And rather than it's a motivation, it's kind of like what do you love to do, which then forms a motivation, is you love to solve complex problems in a unique way that nobody else has actually done. And you get great pleasure out of doing that. And that provides you with a stimulus, which is great for you, but it's also great for the business. So I see that if we can focus and harness this concept of motivation, it provides so much more joy and benefit for yourself being connected to the business, but so much more joy and benefit also for the people around you. And so there's so much flow-on effect for it. So I'd love to talk about the word motivation today.
That's such a nice example as well, because it's a very personal motivation. What you described is this thing that you can see because it lights him up and it gives him a kick. And I know the same person and I can absolutely see what you're talking about. And that's so different from what we tend to think we need to motivate ourselves or other people with, because we tend to think we need to give people some kind of thing that motivates them. But actually, it would be a very interesting question for lots of business owners to ask themselves, what is it that really motivates me? Like you looked at there, and also to look at that in terms of other people in the business. What is it? I bet you know for all the people on your team what really motivates them. And I bet that it's rarely their salary or their bonus or whatever. That's kind of in there, but I don't think it's the thing.
And it's good to talk about the thing. And I think what I look for in people is, and you can see what lights them up. And you've seen, and we've had conversations like this before in the podcast, where you'll see me towards the end of a conversation and I'll be more lit up than I was at the start, and vice versa. And it'll be because we've actually spoken about the things that you do enjoy, that do motivate you to be continually doing even this conversation. And so when I look at this, I'm always looking for the thing that lights somebody up, and you can see it in their expression and in the way that they sort of start to talk and elevate voice or whatever it actually is. And so I'm constantly looking for that, because and this is a concept we've spoken about before, about business owner fatigue. And when people lose motivation, the fatigue increases and they get a larger disconnection with the business, and then they end up saying, well, I've had enough of this and I'm going to go and sell or do whatever I want to do. But if we reconnect them back in, and we've spoken about this concept of purpose before. So that's the other thing I wouldn't mind talking about too, is the connection between motivation and purpose, and whether really how aligned are the two things or how separate are the two things, because sometimes motivation, as we know, could be away from pain or towards something of significant benefit or something of good. So, what are our motivators, and is it a combination of two? And is it good to have something you want to move away from? And is it good to something to move towards something as well? And what's the best mix or combination? And how do we think about that? Because if we know that the businesses are better when we're more motivated as business owner, it'd be really good to understand how to tap into that.
I'm reflecting on an experience that I had recently, or I've had a few times recently, where I've done something in my business, which was generally sending out an email, and it's had much more impact than the same or similar emails would have had let's say a year ago or even 6 months ago. And that's very interesting for me because I noticed that that means quite a lot to me. And at one level, so I think this is something about purpose and motivation. The purpose for me is something that kind of carries me even through the very non-impactful times or the times when things are really not working well. But motivation is more immediate. And there's something about the energy that I have to do whatever it is that I need to do today and tomorrow and the next day that take me in the direction of purpose, where motivation becomes very valuable, and it's hard to function when you don't have that much motivation. And I know that if I'm entirely motivated by things that are outside myself, that doesn't work. But also if I get it too much, it's only intrinsic motivation. It's only that also doesn't feel that good anyway. What I'm noticing is that if there's a feedback loop, that tends to build the motivation. So if I do something and it does some good or it produces some result that's significant and there's more than it's been in the past, there's this kind of positive feedback that comes back that says, oh, I'd like to do more. I'd like to give more here. I'd like to create more here. I'd like to try out more here. So the feedback is a part of it. So I'm curious now about a combination of the kind of intrinsic and extrinsic. My sense is that there is a mix between stuff that we generate from inside ourselves and feedback that comes from the outside world that actually really creates much more motivation.
Something you said then that I started to think about more deeply is that if you say that purpose is where you want to get to, or it's part of a destination maybe,
Or a direction.
or the direction, and you spoke about energy. So motivation becomes the energy to help you lead towards that direction or stay on that direction to get to ensure that you're continually living your purpose or moving closer to what you're ultimately trying to achieve. Is there something in that in terms of what you're talking about? Is that the explanation that you're sort of talking about? Is the intrinsic and extrinsic associated with it?
Well, it's really interesting because at one level, what I've experienced is that purpose gives you energy. But that feels, I'm talking on a very feeling level at the moment, that feels to me more like the energy to keep going and keep going and keep going and keep going, whatever happens. Just to keep going in a direction which is expanding on or giving you some experience that feels like it's fulfilling in terms of your purpose. Motivation feels more like the day-to-day energy to be able to do the things you need to do today that are just the next step in that long journey. So, and they're part and parcel of the same thing. You can't really separate them out. So having the energy for the long journey and then having the energy for today, both of them are necessary. If you have, it's like, oh, well, I can do this long journey, but I'm exhausted every day, so I'm just kind of dragging my feet in a direction. It's not going to be very satisfying. You're not going to create very much. But also, if you're like a bouncy little bunny and I'm full of energy today, but I have no direction, there's not this kind of long-term power that's kind of moving me through my life, then you can easily kind of flip-flop all over the place and again not really create or achieve so much.
So where does the negative and positive emotion come into this, or motivation come into this? Because you can be motivated by fear, okay, to go away from something, or towards wanting to achieve something, so therefore it's going towards something. So in terms of, we say sometimes that when an employee walks into my office and says, I've just bought a house, I think that's a good thing because it means they're motivated to pay the mortgage every day, so they're going to keep turning up to work. And so, people get out of bed, obviously, to pay the mortgage or the bills, as people talk about as a motivation, or the fear of not being able to pay the bills or not being able to serve who they're serving for. And so there's this fear element, or fear of loss, fear of failure, moving away from pain, having to do it because of money. So there's a whole lot of stuff that that could be motivating that doesn't relate to purpose, you know,
Yeah,
or
but the
could,
honest
because
truth is, if somebody's just bought a house and they need to pay their mortgage, but that's not the only story. It's not they don't only pay their mortgage because they've got to pay their mortgage. They bought a house, they probably spent ages choosing the house, maybe they have a family and they want to give a good life to their family. So to me that the forward motivation or the positive motivation and the kind of tinge of fear of what if I can't pay the mortgage, what if I'm not making enough money, those sit hand in hand. They're on a spectrum, and we don't sit at one place on that spectrum. In a way, we occupy quite a wide range on that spectrum. And we all touch into fear at times, and we all touch into enthusiasm and positivity and creativity. Some people will be more orientated towards fear, but they're never, no one's just totally driven by fear. Everyone has something that they care about or that they want to do for somebody else. So I think we sometimes simplify it too much.
because fear doesn't light people up. Like when they talk about their fears, they're not sort of lighting up about, but when they're talking about things that they want to achieve or create, or, you know, whether that's sort of a family home in that situation or an environment that their family grows and develops, or a better business, or, you know, something that they feel good about in terms of that creativity or creation, they typically light up. But they don't light up when they think about the fear aspect of it. But fear still, I still see fear being a bit of a motivator for people to say, well, I don't want to, I want to move away from that.
Yeah, and that's a really good thing. And fear doesn't pay the bills. We need to be really clear that fear is actually an energy that closes you, it makes it harder. But being able to say, I don't want to be there, I do want to be here, or I don't ever want to go back there, I want to go forward in this direction. From that perspective, fear is very useful. And the negativity is really useful to be able to say, I don't want that, because it helps you to orientate to what you do want. So I think it's a good direction thing. It's like if you're walking in that direction and it makes more and more fear, you know you're walking in the wrong direction. Turn around, go the other way. The fear is still there, but you're moving away from it rather than moving towards it. So it becomes a reference point rather than a stick. We talk about the carrot and the stick. Instead of it being
Yeah.
a stick that beats you forward, it becomes a reference point. That's not actually how I want to live my life. I want to live like this and move more towards what lights me up and less towards what makes me feel stressed.
So just keep having this visualization of just this walking away from something towards something
Yeah.
and the reference point is what was behind you that you're walking away from, and what you're trying to walk towards is the thing that is becomes the motivator. So it's still a motivator towards something. Yes, you're trying to get away from something, but you're still moving towards something. So there's still this concept of movement forward.
Well, it's rather like walking up a mountain, and you're moving towards the top of the mountain. And even though it's much easier to walk downhill actually, but there's this desire to get to the top of the mountain. And if you keep looking, and anyone who's walked quite a bit will know that if you keep looking behind you, you get this incredible sense of achievement because you move further and further away from the reference point in the valley. And even 10 minutes of walking up a steep hill, which feels like you've hardly gone anywhere, you look back and it's amazing how far you've come. So that reference point can be a big motivator because, especially when you're closer to the bottom than you are to the top, the only thing you can really see is how far you've moved from where you were. As you come closer to the top, you can relate to it more. You start to be able to position yourself against how close am I at to where I'm going. But that I found that I remember I used to walk a lot in mountains, and it astonished me how that motivation worked, moving away from the bottom, moving towards the top. And often I would get a second wind or a third wind when I was near the top, and I would just be powering along when I should have been tired because I was getting close to the top and the view was opening up, and suddenly you're beginning to experience the reason why you went up there in the first place.
So using that mountain analogy, I can see how, and my experience with being in business and seeing what happens in business is that you get sort of the initial injection and the excitement of starting to walk up the mountain, on the journey. You can look back and say, oh, look, wow, look how far we've come in such a short period of time. And then there's this middle piece that occurs where you're no longer sort of seeing that, oh, I don't feel like I'm actually making that much of a progress from where I was. And gee, the top of the mountain feels like a long, long way away. And so the motivation in that situation starts to really dip. And that's where people start to lose their way. And they go, well, do I really want to keep going up the mountain? Or is this thing over here that, is a nice little parkland for me to go and pitch a tent for a while and just sort of, hide for a bit.
I
And so,
remember exactly, I sometimes used to walk halfway up the hill and say, you know what? I'd really rather just lie down and go to sleep for a little while. I was working
yeah,
really hard at the time. But that was interesting because I always felt like I'd missed something by not going all the way up, although it was quite legitimate for me to do that. But you're exactly right. That's what can happen in the middle. So maybe we need to keep having reference points behind us, in front of us, so we can, instead of always looking back to where we started from, we can say, oh, where was I a year ago or 6 months ago? Wow, I've done so much. And where am I going towards that's not the end point? And then we come back to the topic we've talked about so many times, which is goals. And then it becomes about having goals or milestones that really mean something to us. And so,
and that's exactly what I was about to say about mean stuff because, I was having a conversation about our business today and we have done very well in terms of that progression and that movement forward and we've worked really, really hard and you can look at all the indicators financially and that and say, look, that's pretty amazing in terms of what we've achieved. I didn't feel it. I wasn't feeling that like I actually turned around and looked like I was looking backwards and go, wow, look how far I come and go, because that's not my reference point. Okay. But if you spoke to me about some of the things, the amazing things that our team have achieved or that our clients have achieved or that, from a tangible, impactful way, then I go, oh, that's really cool. I get that bit, or the GDP that we might have helped this country or whatever it is. There's other. I think we've got to be very focused on what is it, that specific thing that you go, that makes me feel good, that lights me up, and I go, I know that I've actually moved forward, even though it might only been a small bit compared to what it was before, but I actually feel good about that. And I've got to say that's hard to find sometimes, especially in that period that we talked about in the middle, where it can become a bit dark and a bit of a mush.
it feels to me like we need to have our own very individual behind and forward reference points. I think of people, there are people I know who, for example, have been bankrupted, and there's a guy who tells a story of coming home and seeing his car being lifted up by the tow away truck and his wife standing outside the door, and they'd lost everything, kind of thing, and he said, I'll never do that again. And that was a very personal, we hear those stories all the time, usually the very dramatic ones rather than the ordinary ones, but that made a marker in his life of, I'm not going back there again. And I know for me, not being able to pay the rent after my business failed in London in 2010, there was a marker from there. It's like, I'm not going back there again. I don't care how hard it is, but I don't ever want to be in that place again. But that was my story. And that's not a story about how much money are you earning or what are your financial goals or how many people you have on your team. It's a very individual story. And I think all of us need to tap into our individual story and also into that individual, what is it that perhaps I'm really wanting to learn this year or get better at this year, it would give me so much pleasure to be able to look back in a year's time or 2 years' time or 6 months and say, wow, I've come from there to here. And it might not be anything to do with goals. but it might be something that is so meaningful for you and that gets expressed through your business and makes your business better, so the goals are achieved in the process of it.
Yeah, I just want to say something as a warning because I'm an accountant at the end of the day. You still got to look after the financial aspects of the
Of
business and making
course,
sure that you're moving in the right direction.
of course. Yeah.
And we're still measuring those particular things. And what I said before about sort of I didn't feel it. Look, the reality is I'm really proud of what we've achieved and it's good indicators and we can see that we're moving forward. But there's this deeper sensation that I get, or that you can get, where the light up occurs that we are talking about before, that is the indicator that you're talking about. And if we can measure that in some way and we can keep focused on that, and that becomes like, the financial metric that we look at on a month to month basis, week to week, year to year basis, that we can see the progression of our businesses,
I don't think
then
you can
that,
usually measure it though. I don't think
well,
you can
that's interesting.
necessarily measure it. I think it needs to be aligned with the direction of the business and the success of the business financially. So it needs to support it. But generally it will. It will. If it's something that is so motivating for you, unless it's something like, oh, I just want to spend all day surfing. Of course there are people like that. And
Mm.
that could just be a distraction. But if it's aligned with becoming more successful in the business as well, the thing is that sometimes the most valuable things can't really be measured as such. And I think that that's a really good thing. I know they say you can only improve what you can measure, but that's absolute rubbish. Honestly, you can
So
improve
is
lots
it
of things
aligned
you
more
can't
with a
measure.
feeling then?
Hmm?
Sorry, is it aligned more with a feeling then? Do you think that
But for
it's
most
actually, so
people,
that's why it's intangible and difficult to measure because it's hard to measure how you feel at that deeper level, at a really strong deeper level?
yeah, definitely. Because it will relate to you feeling more satisfied or more fulfilled or more confident in yourself or happier in yourself, really and truly. Because in the end, everything relates to that, doesn't it? Everything relates to feelings.
But we've spoken about that before personally around it'd be great to be able to measure somebody's levels of happiness or well-being um, at a point in time, and then to show that progression, to say, hang on a minute, you have come a long way from where you were and to where you are today, because it's very hard to remember that progression. It's very hard to remember how you felt 12 months ago or 2 years ago or 5 years ago compared to how you feel today. Like, it's easy to do what you said, to say, okay, there was a physical thing that said, I can't pay my rent. I never want to be in that situation where I can't pay my rent. So there was a measurement there. But there's also a feeling there that you're talking about too, of inadequacy and failure and that sort of type of stuff. And so, well, I don't want to ever feel that way again. And that was your marker. So, as much as you say you can't measure it, I'd love to be able to measure it to a degree, because I think that shows the progression and then the motivation of actually saying, well, actually, I feel good, but how much better could I feel if I did these things?
Yeah, I think it's a yes and a no. I
Yeah.
get it that you can measure your happiness on a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 100, and you can put a number in there. And I've done that experiment with people, and then there comes a point where they reach 10 and they realize, oh, but I could go up to 15, so that
Mm.
what used to be their 100% then they have to open up the scale beyond that. But also, there is this notion and this experience that what I'm experiencing in this moment, it doesn't need to be measured, because it's complete in itself. And many people only really experience that perhaps in nature or when they're skiing or surfing or something. But supposing you could experience that in business as well, where this is not about what can I measure and what can I improve and what can I, but there's something that feels really good in itself and that I can nurture. So it does kind of grow, it kind of expands, but it's not about the measurability of it. It's about the experience of it. It's being present.
About the awareness of it, because that's the thing that I've really been focusing on a lot lately, is the awareness of the way that you reflect. So what happens is that sometimes I can go through a day and, I've got through the day and done what I had to do and that sort of type thing. But I haven't actually had the time to sit down and think about it and go, was that a good day? Did I actually enjoy that? Was there some really good things that actually occurred in that particular day that I think I want more of that? And so therefore I focus on it. I can get into stages where, in the morning I'll think about my day, go, I got this meeting, that meeting, I've got to speak to that person and whatever it is. But then I catch myself and there's that moment of awareness is what I'm saying there, is where I'm sitting back and going, actually, today's going to be a really good day because I actually get to do the things that I love to do and speak to the people that I love to speak to. Because as we discussed before, the thing that I sort of reflect on is that I like to do cool things with cool people for a better life sort of thing. And so therefore, if that's the formula for me or that's the focus, I go, well, actually, that is a cool person and I'm actually doing some pretty cool stuff with that particular person for the impact and benefit of a better life. But sometimes I have to catch myself from an awareness perspective to recognize that that's actually what I'm doing rather than just going through the day.
It's really interesting. I've been doing a couple of exercises recently that I'm being taught in a program actually that I'm doing. And one of the things I have to do at the beginning of the day is to project to the end of the day and looking back at the day and just feeling really good about it. Whatever's happened, whatever is in the day, feeling really good about it. But there's another thing, there's something that I added onto it, which is a very interesting exercise, and anyone can do this. I started to look at how I feel around certain activities. So for example, if I have lots of emails in my inbox, sometimes I feel this slightly contracted, kind of crushed energy around it, like, oh, I've just got to get through all of these emails before my next meeting or in this gap that I have. And I just thought that's not a really good energy to have around it. And so I started to allow myself to feel more joy around answering all those emails. And it's something you can practice every day, to just allow that, whatever your normal feeling is, which is a habit, it's just a habitual feeling. It has nothing to do with emails, actually, it's just a habit. Allow that habitual feeling to turn into a feeling that you would really love, not by forcing it. Forcing it is not a good thing, but just, it's like, let that good feeling emerge from it. And that's changing my experience. And what that means is I get more positive feedback from what I'm doing, which means that the motivation becomes more and more built into what I'm doing, if you see what I mean. Like, what I'm doing becomes more pleasurable. Pleasure is a natural motivation, so I want to do more of those kinds of things. So I'm really experimenting with how I can feel, especially in the parts of work that I probably enjoy least.
Yeah, and when you're talking there, it's really trying to find that discipline of structure to ensure that you actually do acknowledge it rather than sort of just letting the day drift by and then you get to the next day and the next day and one day you wake up and you're not feeling that great. But there's no reason not to feel that great. As you say, it's kind of a bit of a story that's gone on. So I like that we're breaking, I suppose, down to say, well, what is it that one is a motivator, and two, how do we actually ensure that we focus on it and know that we're achieving and know that we're walking forward to help us stay connected with our businesses. So all these things are great things to remember because they're not novel or new concepts, but what happens is that we push them to the back of our brain and we don't bring them for them. But by doing the exercises you're talking about, helps us to create that awareness, and the awareness then helps us to practice it, to acknowledge it, which then becomes a pleasurable experience, as you say, which is then becomes part of the motivator. So it's this cycle or circle that is what I'm hearing that you're talking about.
Well, in a way, it comes down to something very simple. We're motivated by pleasure, and we're motivated to move away from pain. And rather than letting the work that we do determine whether we experience pleasure or pain, we decide, I want to feel pleasure, so I want to experience joy while I'm doing these things. Joy is the thing, joy or peace are the things most business owners want, I discover, both probably. And so rather than saying, well, that's not a very joyful activity, so I'm just going to survive those 2 hours, We decide in advance how we want to feel. But I want to feel joyful today, even when I'm doing emails or even when I'm having a meeting with somebody I don't really want to meet. Whatever your story is, so you decide how you're going to feel. So you decide you're going to experience pleasure today, and then the motivation is built in. And of course, if you're really enjoying everything you do, whatever you do in your business is likely to go better than if you're not enjoying it or you're feeling resistant towards it. So there's a very beautiful kind of feedback cycle and expansive cycle of motivation that comes from that.
Which comes down to the word choice. And it's easier said than done to actually choose to be that, and the discipline of choice, because there's things that happen in the day that you look at and go, really? I can't see how this is going to be pleasurable at all.
But try deciding at the beginning of today that I'm going to enjoy today, whatever happens. And that's it's a very, very simple little discipline that we get better and better at. I'm not perfect at it, but I can see that it's beginning to work better. And that's really the point.
Exactly. And the reason why I threw that in there is that it's not going to be easy to do 100% of the time. But if we continually just keep practicing and trying it, and the discipline of it, then that allows it. And even the really horrible things, that if you've got the right attitude when you're going into the horrible stuff that you've got to do in your business every day, it makes it a little bit more tolerable than by if you've got a different attitude, or if you can change your attitude even slightly. And we know this stuff, and it's obvious, but we don't do it. And day in, day out, the amount of conversations I have with business owners where they go, I'm really not enjoying it. Okay. And then you've got to break down and say, what aren't you enjoying, and why aren't you enjoying it, and what can we change, and what's the motivator to change? It's going back into all those things again.
So I'm going to give you something really measurable.
Mm-hmm.
If we could just go from 30% enjoyment to 70%, you don't really have to get to 100%. It'd be such a difference for most people. That would be hugely, hugely worthwhile. And if you can go from 30 to 70, you can probably go from 70 to 75 to 80, because you've got the inner technology of it by then. You know how to do it. So it is actually really worthwhile to find the simple things that make that kind of difference.
And the measurement is very subjective, obviously, because it just comes down to about how you feel.
Exactly. So why not?
Well, that's been an interesting conversation about the word motivation. Is there anything else that can help us ensure that we remain motivated as business owners? Because we know we run better businesses when we are more motivated, and we're more connected and having a better life and enjoying more. From the conversations that we've had today?
Well, the word that comes to me is honesty, being honest with ourselves, being honest about if you're not enjoying it, don't just suffer day after day after day, but be honest about that and solve it. If there are things that you love and things that you don't love, be honest about that and see what you can do. I think just being honest with ourselves is a very powerful starting point, because it's easier in a way to lie to yourself and just keep going, keep battling. And that sucks the energy out of you and will leave you without motivation for years, potentially. People who burn out lose motivation for years and years sometimes. So in a way, we're almost making light of it here. But what we're talking about is something really important. And
Absolutely.
yeah, so it's worth being honest. It's worth looking for solutions if you recognize that you're not very motivated. Having the right conversations, and they come when you are willing to speak openly about what you're really experiencing, and also about what you really want, being honest about what you want. It is all right to want to really enjoy yourself at work. It's all right to want to experience more peace or more joy or just more fun in your life. And these things, sometimes people deny themselves because they think they've just got to work hard, and you're left longing for something that you're not experiencing. I really feel that to be honest about what you want is one of the most powerful and simple ways that you can create change in your life.
And that takes courage. And so that's the other thing, that to be honest sometimes takes courage and reflect and making difficult decisions. So I think that's part of the motivation too. Great.
Well, I actually feel very motivated by everything after having this conversation. I feel really like this kind of enjoyment in even thinking about my business. So I hope that other people feel something similar.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Well, it's been a good chat. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to The Spirit of Business with Matt Murphy and Sarah McCrum. We'll be back next week with another episode. You'll find the show notes with links and other useful information on our website, spiritofbusiness.live. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends.